Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be working on react-chatbot-kit, which is my open source package that I maintain, and I'm going to implement a few features that I've had in mind for a while. So the first thing I want to focus on is the ability to create widgets for both the chatbot and the user. Now, just as a brief context, a widget in the context of the chatbot is actually just a plain React component that you can register in the config. So if you look at the example in front of you, or in front of us here, this part here underneath the message box is actually a custom widget that renders an image and some options here. And these options are configured so that when you click them, they elicit a chatbot response. So if I press on widgets, for example, I'll get a chatbot response. And then this is actually also a new widget, a custom component. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example of how the action provider looks like right now. So if we go down here, and we look at, so this example right here. So the action provider is the heart of the chatbot that decides what you are going to do. And you create functions in the action provider that trigger actions in the chatbot. So it kind of it's the entity that updates the chatbot with responses. So right here, for example, we have handle message parser, and we're saying that when we trigger this function, we create a new chatbot message, and the content is this text right here. And then we have an options object here that has the widget and the with avatar as keys. And then we have message parser as the widget name. So in our config, we have a corresponding widget that's registered with this name. And when we trigger this message, we show this widget. And we can actually check this out right here. If we press the message parser button, then now we are executing this function. And this is actually the message parser widget. So with that in mind, now the only way you can do this is with the create chatbot message, because that's the way it worked when I first created this package. And then at a later point in time, I added this create client message, which allows you to programmatically create a user response. So if I write something in here, this is a user message. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that I can also trigger a widget programmatically with this create client message function. So let's go ahead and get into that, and we'll go ahead and switch over to our editor. So here we are inside of the react-chatbot-kit source code. And we're inside of chatbot.tsx, which is the main entry point for the chatbot. And this component does a lot of bootstrapping. It gets a lot of properties from the config, and it does a lot of checking to see if we have all of our required props. And then once we do all of that work, we basically render the chat component, and we pass through a lot of information to that. So a lot of the heavy lifting after the bootstrapping is done is happening inside of this component. So we'll go into that, and then we'll take a look at that together just to see what's going on. And then we'll see where we're going to do our work. So the first thing we do inside of this component is to actually get the messages from the state object. And we also set up a container ref, which we use in this function right here to scroll to the bottom of the chat container. So I want to show you something. And usually when you use a widget, especially when you use a widget, you tend to, overflow the height of this container here. And once that happens, it's really useful to scroll to the bottom so that you're always at the bottom of the chat. And that's what this function allows you to do inside of here. And we also pass that through to all of the widgets so that they can call them. You can decide to call that function if you need it, and then you'll automatically scroll to the bottom of the screen. So moving on, we have some functionality that allows us to decide when to show an avatar or not. And then the bulk of the work happens in render messages. And I put up a console log here so we could take a look at the messages object together. And what happens in render messages is we accept the messages object, and then we do a lot of operations and checking on that, because the messages object, it contains all of the information we need in order to render our responses or messages into the chatbot window. So we're going to take a look at what the message object looks like, just to get an inkling of what we are working with. And I have run npm link inside of this folder. And I've also linked a local project. So inside of the react-chatbot-kit docs, which is also available on GitHub as an open source project, I've run, let's see, npm link react chatbot kit. So that means that this is now linked to my local copy of React Chatbot Kit. So when I run this and I go over in here and I do, so it's starting. Now this is the live version. So let's go ahead and open up localhost 3000. That's going to start React Chatbot Kit docs locally. And inside of here, I want to do npm run build watch. So that's going to keep watching for changes. It's going to make the changes and then rebuild it on the fly. So if we hit save now and we head over to our browser and we open up the console, hopefully that should update. And it hasn't yet, so let's go ahead and make sure. There we go. And now if we refresh, we can see the message objects in our console here. And you can see that a message has an ID, it has a loading property, it has a message property, it has a type, and it can have a widget, and you can have with avatar, which is either false or true. And it also takes a delay. So let's take a look at the rest of this function now. So if it's not a bot message, then we just render a user chat message. And do some checking on the avatar. And then we create a lot of props that we are passing through to the chatbot message. And if it has a widget, we are rendering a chatbot message with widget. Now, I'm not sure I'm a fan of how I've actually done this, because inside of this component, I have to accept all of these props and make sure that they are passed down to the actual chatbot message and then I have to conditionally render a widget. So what I want to do is I want to actually go ahead and create a new function here. And I'm going to say render chatbot message with widget. And we're going to call it. Now, that means we need to make this function and it needs to accept chatbot message props. And it needs to accept the message object ID. And you know what? Let's remove this. Let's make it simpler. Let's instead return a fragment and we'll say chatbot message. And we'll go ahead and check inside of here. We're passing everything down, so that should be fine. Put all of that in here. And we'll close the chatbot message. And we'll remove this. So now we shouldn't be able to see any widgets if we go back to our browser window. Now we have no widgets here and everything's just empty. So what we want to do is we want to move the chatbot message with widgets. So this functionality here, I want to have inside of this component. So we'll put that there. And we'll hit save. And let's see. So pass down props is not defined. That makes sense. It's not going to be. Let's pass down props. I call that spread the message object directly here. Remove the curly brackets. And we'll say chatbot message props dot widget. And we'll hit save. And we're still having some issues with pass down props not being defined, and that's here. So that's going to be chatbot message props dot loading. And are we using it? All right, so we'll actually rename that to be lowercase. Let's see. So looks like we missed one. Chatbot message props, chatbot. Go here. And we'll do this. And it looks like we're having a slight issue here. This is now suddenly blue, so it means that we are not getting the result we want in terms of styling. Let's see if we can do anything about that. Yeah, so it's going to be custom styles dot bot message box. And then that should take care of it. Now we have the same result as before. And what we want to do is we want to add actually this functionality right here to the user chat message up here. So let's go ahead and see if we can make that happen as well. So we're going to say message. Since it's a user message, it doesn't have a loading property, so we can remove the conditionally render. And that means we can remove this. We need to put this inside of curly brackets. So now we're getting the widget, and it's going to be on the message object. And then we are passing in the state and the scroll into view there as well. So I think that should be fine. So let's go ahead and test this out. And we'll do that by opening the source code here for react-chatbot-kit docs. And we'll head over to the config for docspot. And what we'll do is we'll take one of these here. So widget name config, for example, and we'll add an initial message that is create user message. And we'll say widget config. And we need to import create user message from react-chatbot-kit. And then we seem to have a problem. Object is not a function. Yeah. Create user message. We're importing it. Let's take a look at it in our chatbot code. So here, I suspect we don't actually accept an object as, or an options object here. So we're going to go to chat utils. And here we are accepting create client message. And we need to accept options. And then in create chat message, we are, all right, so we need to make this an object. And we'll spread create chat message. And then we'll spread the options. That means that now we are merging these two things together. So we're creating the message here, which is the message, the type, and the ID. And then we're adding on the options. So this will now become an object that has message, hi there, type is going to be user, and then the ID will be a random number or string. I think it's a number. Can't remember exactly. And now it will also have a widget property that says config. So we can pick up on that like we did in the react-chatbot-kit docs. So let's make sure we are actually importing the right thing. So it's create client message here, not the user message. And it's not used because we need to make sure that it stays the same here. And there we go. So we have now, I just change the window. Here we render a user message and we have the config widget rendered. And the config widget is just a button that leads you to a gist. But still, that's pretty good for a day's work. So I think I'm gonna round off there. And in the next video, I want to add support for building in custom types so that you can switch out or define custom types in the config and decide on a component to render. So that should be pretty cool, I think. Again, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe. It helps me massively and I really appreciate it. And hopefully I'll see you in the next video as well.